Hello, my name's Kingsley Singleton, Deputy Editor of Digital Photo, and welcome to this Photoshop and Elements video lesson. Once you've got a basic understanding of how layers and selections can be used, you can start putting them to work on your pictures. Do this and you'll soon discover they're a great way to make subtle improvements, and this simple landscape image is a great example. Take a look at the Layers palette here on the right hand side of the screen and you'll see that here we've used three kinds of layers, each one made with a different type of selection. I've started by enlarging and straightening the rather puny foreground. There you can see the difference between the two just by clicking on and off that eye icon. And this has been done by copying that part of the image to a new layer and then using the transform tools to increase its size and also distort it slightly. Then, because it's on a separate layer to the background, we can use the eraser tool to subtly delete the join between the old and new parts of the image, creating a nice natural blend. Next, I've added some clouds to that vacant sky, just giving a bit more top to the picture and kind of stopping your eye from wandering around in that blank part of the frame. These have come from a completely different picture and, again, have been inserted above the old background layer, so I can move them around and decide where they best fit the composition. A selection helps match the new sky to the existing hillside, and some more work with that eraser tool has bedded it in quite nicely. Finally, on this image, I've used a levels adjustment layer to improve the contrast and thereby bring out a little more detail in those distant areas. A selection was made before the adjustment layer was applied, so the effect goes right where we want it. So you'll soon see that using even these simple tricks can give you a great level of control over your pictures. And once you've followed along with this tutorial, you'll be a lot more comfortable using layers and selections to enhance your pictures. Okay, so let's see how it's done. First by just closing down our example picture. No need to save that. And then I'm going to open up the start image, which you'll find on the CD, and that's just called lake.jpg. So the first thing we want to do is enlarge and straighten the foreground, just making this jetty a little bit more prominent by increasing its size in the frame. To do this, we're going to make a broad selection of the whole bottom half of the image, and we're going to do that using the rectangular marquee tool. It's over here in the toolbox. Just click and hold the mouse button down on the elliptical marquee tool and you'll see it pop out there, and we can then select it. And then, before you make your selection, take a quick look in the options bar, always a good habit to get into, and we just want to, in this case, make sure that it's set to New Selection, that Feather is set to 0 pixels, and that the mode is set to Normal. And then we can simply click and drag out a selection, just like that. Once you release the mouse button, the marching ants will appear all the way around those selected pixels, and now that we've chosen the pixels, we can copy them to a new layer. To do that, come up to Layer, down to New, and pick Layer via Copy. Or alternatively, you can use the keyboard shortcut, which is Ctrl and J. As soon as I do that, those selected pixels will appear as a new layer in the Layers palette. If you can't see your Layers palette, just come up to Window and down to Layers and it'll pop on the side of the screen there. Next, we want to increase the size of this new layer. So first we better make sure that it's selected in the Layers palette. It should be as soon as the new layer is added there, but if it's not, just make sure that you click on it and it'll be highlighted and then we can proceed. To do this, we're going to use the Free Transform tool, which you can either activate by pressing Ctrl and T on the keyboard or by coming up to Image, down to Transform and picking Free Transform. And if you're using the full version of Photoshop, you'll find that option under the Edit menu. Give that a click, and as soon as you do, a bounding box will appear all the way around the pixels on that layer. Here, because we've only got pixels covering half the layer, just the lower half, the bounding box is restricted to that area. And you can see over in the Layers palette how this is working, because we've got this checkerboard effect above those pixels, showing that there's nothing there, and therefore there's nothing to transform. That's why the bounding box is down there at the bottom. Now we just want to drag out these corner handles to enlarge the jetty, but before we do that, let's take another look in that options bar, and we just want to make sure that the Constrain Proportions box is ticked there, and that's just going to make sure that the dimensions of this area don't distort as we pull those handles. As soon as you've done that, you can just click and drag it outwards, and I'm going to enlarge this area up to about 120%. So that's looking okay. I think if we need to reposition it slightly, we just click within the bounding box, hold the mouse button down, and kind of drag it around where we want, so it's nice and central. And then before we click the tick to finalize that transformation, I just want to square up the jetty ever so slightly. So what I'm going to do is hold down the Control key on the keyboard and just click and drag this top left corner handle upwards ever so slightly, just to straighten up those planks a bit. And that's looking pretty good, I think. And then to make the blend between the new enlarged layer and the old layer a little bit easier, what we're going to do is just click and drag those corner handles inwards, just like that, just forcing the perspective a little more, and also reducing the size of those far off areas, those little ripples in the water, which will make them a bit more similar to those on the layer below. Okay, so that's looking pretty good to me. I think I'm just going to knock it downwards slightly as well, though, just to lose that annoying little angled plank there. And something else you can do with the free transform tool is just use the cursor keys on the keyboard, just tapping them to make fine adjustments. So we're just moving it down ever so slightly towards the bottom of the frame. Okay, I'm happy with that, so I'm going to click the tick, and that finalizes the transformation that we've made. Next up, we want to refine the join between the old background and the new enlarged layer. And we're going to do this using the eraser tool. Nice simple way of doing it. So give that a click in the toolbox. And if I just zoom in on the picture a little bit there, you'll see that at the moment we've got this kind of hard edge which doesn't look very realistic at all. But if I just set that eraser tool to about 250 pixels, make sure the mode is set to brush and the opacity is 100%, we can then just very simply click and move the eraser tool along that hard line. Just drag the layers palette out of the way for a second, all the way from one side of the image to the other, just getting rid of that unnatural looking join. Now as you do this, you do need to be using an eraser with a soft edge, because if you use a hard-edged eraser, you're just going to be creating another hard line. To get a soft edge on your eraser tool, just hold down the Shift key on the keyboard and press the left square bracket key a few times, and you'll see it soften up in the brush preview there. What we're also going to do, before we leave this area of the image, is just knock that opacity down to about 20%, and then make just another couple of passes, just blending in those two areas. You don't want to get too close to the posts there. Don't want to erase them. But just on those other parts, we can just make it a little bit more seamless by using that low opacity eraser. Okay, so that's starting to look pretty good. And if I just click the eye icon off the background layer, you can see where we've used that soft edged eraser just to blend in those two areas. Got that nice kind of feathered edge to it now, which is really working well. Okay, so let's come back out to a full view. And next up, we'll take a look at adding those clouds into the sky. At the moment, it's a bit too vacant, and you find your eye kind of wandering around in this area, trying to lock onto something when it should be right here on the subject in the distance. To do this, we need a new picture. We need a picture of some clouds. So also on this month's CD, you'll find a file called newsky.jpg. Open that on up into Photoshop or Elements. And then we need to get this picture into our main lake scene. How do we do that? Well, the first thing we need to do is select all of the pixels on this new photo. So we're going to press Ctrl and A on the keyboard to do that, or if you like, you can come up to Select and down to All. So that makes a selection of the whole image there. And then we want to copy all of those pixels into the memory. So it's up to Edit and down to Copy, or you can press Ctrl and C on the keyboard. And then we can minimize our new sky picture because we've copied it into the computer's memory. And back on lake.jpg, we can press Ctrl and V on the keyboard, or come up to Edit and down to Paste to bring those clouds in. And as soon as you do that, they'll appear as layer 2 in the layers palette. Obviously, at the moment, they're a little bit too large, so we need to transform them down this time, again using the free transform tool. Ctrl and T on the keyboard to bring that up. Then we'll just click and drag them sort of roughly into position, and we'll use those corner handles again just to resize that layer to something around the same width as the top of the picture. So that's kind of looking okay size-wise, I think. Maybe take it in a little bit on this side, and we can click the tick again to finish that transformation. The next thing we need to do is blend our new sky with the existing landscape. And to do that, we're going to use another type of selection, this time using the magic wand tool to select all of the sky and those blank areas where we want our clouds to sit. We need to see where we're going with this though, so first I'm just going to turn off layer 2, just to hide it there, make it invisible to us for the moment, and then I'm going to click back on the background layer in the layers palette, come over to the toolbox and pick the magic wand tool, and then back up in the options bar, set the tolerance to 10, make sure that anti-alias is ticked and that contiguous is ticked too, and then it's a simple matter of hovering the magic wand tool over the picture and clicking to make the selection. And the reason we can select the sky in this nice easy way is that it's all roughly the same tone and colour. That is, apart from this right hand side of it, which is obviously a little bit outside of our tolerance range. So what we need to do is hold down the shift key on the keyboard, either that or change the icon up here on the top left to add to selection. And then we can click on that area too, and in a couple of clicks we'll have all of that sky area selected. As a selection tool, the magic wand is great for this kind of area, but you do need to make a few refinements to it to make that selection work really well. It's going to be a little bit jagged and unnatural looking if we use it in its present state, so before we use that selection to help blend our clouds in, what we need to do is modify it slightly. To do that, come up to Select and down to Modify, and then we're going to pick the Expand option. Now in this case I'm going to expand the selection by 3 pixels, and the reason for this is that if I don't and we push the clouds into that area, we're going to have a nasty, unrealistic looking halo running along the top of the landscape. By expanding the selection, we push into the hillside a little bit, and therefore when we bring the clouds in, it looks like there's a much more natural blend there. So to expand the selection, let's just click OK. And then I'm also just going to soften the edge of the selected area slightly using the Refine Edge command. Give that a click up in the options bar, and in this case we're going to set our feather to 1 pixel. This just takes the hard edge off it and gives it that slightly more photorealistic look, which we're after in this particular image, so you can click OK. Then in the Layers palette, turn that cloud layer back on, and next we can use the Eraser tool to just delete those areas that we don't want. Give it a click in the toolbox, make sure that opacity is set back up to 100%. Doesn't matter about the edge softness in this case, because we're actually going to be erasing along the edge of the selection, but I'm just going to increase the size of the brush up to about 500 pixels. Now, before we start erasing, we just have to make one more adjustment to our selection, and that's to invert its position. If I click back on layer 2, that's the cloud layer, because that's the area that I want to erase, and then start running the brush over this area, I'm getting rid of the wrong bit. The wrong pixels are selected. Just press Ctrl and Z to take a step backwards there, and then to invert the selection and make it work properly, we'll come up to Select and down to Inverse. And then, just making sure that layer 2 is still selected there, we can start clicking and erasing those parts of the sky that we don't want. Just working the eraser tool all the way down to the bottom of the new sky there, just getting rid of those areas that we don't want. And then, when we're done with our erasing, we can get rid of our selection there, our marching ants, just by coming up to Select and down to Deselect. Now, that's looking okay, but the join is still a little bit too unnatural for my liking, so I'm going to further erase the sky, this time using that low opacity again, taking the opacity all the way down to 10%, and then just running that along the join a couple of times, just to give us a bit more of a more natural lighting to that area. And something else we can do right here is just use the Levels palette this time, bringing that onto the screen with Ctrl and L on the keyboard. And because we're using levels just on layer 2, just on the cloud layer, we can restrict any of the changes to that layer. So if I just push that middle slider over to the left a little bit, you can see that very quickly we lighten that whole area, but we don't affect the rest of the image. And just pushing that over to about sort of 1.2 or 1.5 maybe, that just gives us a bit more of a realistic balance between those old and new images. So click OK to exit the levels palette. And then the final thing that I want to do is just add a little bit more contrast in this area of the image. And I'm going to do that using another different type of selection and another different type of layer. This time we're going to select the area using the polygonal lasso tool. And to use that, we just click point to point across the image, just below the waterline there. And then we'll bring it back up over the top, just selecting that kind of upper third area where the subject's sitting. And then I need to feather this area, a bit like we did with the selection we made for the sky, but using a bit more feathering this time, just to give it a nice gradual blend. I'm going to bring that feather up to about 75 pixels. That's looking okay. So I can click OK to exit the Refine Edge palette. And now that that selection is made in the Layers palette, I can click on the Create Adjustment Layer icon, choose Levels from the list, and then in here, just click and drag that white point slider over to the left, the black point slider a little bit over to the right, just increasing the contrast in that area, and perhaps we'll just push that middle slider over to the right a little bit too. Now if I click on and off the preview icon, you can see that we've just added a little bit more contrast to that part of the image, just lightening the highlights and deepening the shadows. And again, we've managed to keep those changes in exactly the area we want by using a selection. Okay, so that's pretty much it for our simple landscape image. Let's go back to the starting point for a moment, and you can see that it's a bit dull and drab with this weak foreground and this blank sky and the subject lacking in contrast. But just with those three layers and those three different types of selection, we've managed to improve the image a great deal. The only thing left to do is come up to Layer and down to Flatten Image, which will take all of our layers back to a single background layer. And then we're ready to print the image or share it online or do whatever we want with it. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that and you've seen how easy it is to improve an image using layers and selections. The start images we've used are on the CD, so have a practice with them. And then when you're comfortable with what's going on, make sure you give these tips a try on your own images. And then when you've mastered this technique, make sure you give some of the other more advanced projects in this special Layers and Selections Masterclass a go. Okay, thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.